Nearly 3 months after President Obama ordered airstrikes against the Islamic State militants, after he said he would guard against mission creep, no boots on the ground, the nation's top military officer today said we may eventually need boots on the ground. That, as the Secretary of Defense said in the same hearing, there is no military solution. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made the comments during the first hearing in Congress on taking on the Islamic State. General Martin Dempsey told lawmakers that if the president's strategy does not go as planned, the Pentagon may ask permission from the president to put American boots on the ground. That's despite President Obama's repeated promises that there will be no boots on the ground from America. General Dempsey gave lawmakers an example in which he says U.S. soldiers would indeed be needed.
If the Iraqi security forces and the Pesh were at some point ready to retake Mosul, a mission that I would find to be extraordinarily complex, it could very well be part of that particular mission to provide close combat advising or accompanying for that mission.
Close combat advising. In other words, U.S. troops working side by side with Iraqi soldiers in a ground fight. Then there are those so-called moderate rebels in Syria. Remember, they aren't just fighting the Islamic State. They're also trying to fight Bashar al-Assad and topple that brutal dictator. Lawmakers asked if that complication could end up drawing our troops into a whole new fight.
We are now recruiting these young men to go and fight in Syria against ISIL, but if they're attacked by Bashar Assad, we're not going to help them.
They will defend themselves, Senator.
Will we help them against Assad's error?
We will help them and we will support them as we have trained them.
Will we repel Bashar Assad's air assets that will be attacking them?
Any attack on those that we have trained who are supporting us, we will help them.
We will help them. What that help would involve is at this moment very much unclear. But at the very least, it could mean defending the rebels against Assad's forces. And highlighting this complicated situation in Syria, the Islamic State today took credit for shooting down a Syrian fighter plane and posted these pictures of the wreckage. Our enemies fighting our enemies, all while it is not at all clear who our friends are. As for that so-called moderate rebel group, which really isn't a group, part of it is the Free Syrian Army, the Associated Press reports today that it at times has teamed up with an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel told lawmakers the United States will monitor the rebels to make sure that any weapons the United States provides do not fall into the wrong hands. They will be monitored. They will be vetted. It will be fine. Ed Henry on Fox Top Story live at the White House. Looks like Congress is ready to sign off on giving these moderate rebels weapons, but not everybody's on board.
And that is something that's raising some eyebrows as well. You could hear, as you lay all that out, Shep, the skepticism growing today in this Senate hearing room about what really is the strategy and what comes next here after the airstrikes, not just in Iraq, but in Syria that the president has telegraphed. I mean, first of all, the fact that you had General Dempsey opening the door for the first time to the possibility of U.S. combat troops going in, despite everything the president said, raised a lot of eyebrows in that room. But secondly, the idea of training and arming these rebels, something the president's rejected for 3 years. You had one of the president's fellow Democrats, Joe Manchin, say, how do I go home to West Virginia and explain this to my constituents when you've got Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, attacking these rebels, and maybe the arms we give the rebels wind up in the wrong hands? Listen.
He's fighting the same people that we're asking the people to train to fight, that we're going to spend $500 million. Makes no sense to me, and I can't sell it. I've tried all my... You can't sell this stuff. And no one believes the outcome will be any different.
Nobody believes the outcome will be any different. Some strong words there. Nonetheless, Speaker John Boehner said today that it'll be a vote as early as tomorrow in the House to give the president this power to train and arm the moderate rebels in Syria. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid suggesting as well there'll be a bipartisan vote in the Senate the next couple of days. So this is a rare bit of bipartisanship up on the Hill, but nonetheless, skepticism about whether it will work.
Bipartisanship on arming the rebels. Ed, thanks. Now keep in mind what we've just learned. The military may ask for U.S. troops to fight this war on the ground. That's brand new today. But for right now, we're planning to support the Iraqi army, which folded in the face of ISIS and left our weapons for them just a few short months ago. That Iraqi army on which our leaders tell us will rely to be the fighting force on the ground in the Iraq part of this conflict with ISIS. It's mostly disbanded, that Iraqi army, and being reorganized now. Now, on the Syrian side of this war with ISIS, we'll rely on the moderate forces within Syria. So who are they? Republican Senator Mike Lee reminded us in the hearing today. It's a minute and a half long. It is very important.
On each of you that if ISIL had...
He stated that the notion of arming Syrian rebels has, and the next few sentences are all in a quote, has, quote, always been a fantasy. This idea that we could provide some light arms or even sophisticated arms to what was essentially an opposition made up of former doctors, farmers, pharmacists, and so forth, and that they were going to be able to battle not only a well-armed state, but also a well-armed state backed by Russia, backed by Iran, a battle-hardened Hezbollah. That was never in the cards, close quote. Now, the president, hardly a month later, is seeking authorization to do basically that. So, Mr. Secretary, what has changed, and why does the president, who apparently didn't think that would work and described that as some sort of fantasy about a month ago, what has changed to make him think that it will work now?
Well, first, thank you, Senator. At the risk of interpreting what the president meant when he said that, I recognize that is always risky, as I've said. But let me address your question this way. What's changed now is the urgency of what has occurred in the Middle East.
What has changed now is the urgency of what has occurred in the Middle East. Of course, Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah's question was, what has changed about the fighters on whom we'll rely to be the ground forces in Syria as we work toward our goal of destroying the Islamic State? What has changed about those fighters? To that question, Senator Lee got no answer from Secretary Hagel. And the Republican Senator Mike Lee understands that and more. Listen.
I do understand that that there are some developments that have occurred since then that have brought this appropriately to our attention, to the attention of the world. I would be curious to know, though, strategically how that changes, something that he previously described as a kind of fantasy into something that could be realistic. But I understand that that's difficult for you to answer in this context. I'd love to be able to talk more about that on another occasion.
Difficult to answer in this context. Would love to talk about that on another occasion. This is the occasion. This is the time that our government set aside to talk about, among other things, the fighters on whom we plan to rely to accomplish our stated goal of destroying ISIS. Today, in Congress, Secretary Hagel, General Martin Dempsey, and others before our representatives, your representatives and mine. The facts on the ground are these. Nothing has changed. Nothing. Nothing except for widespread reports that the Islamic State and those moderate rebels declared a truce. ISIS and the moderate Syrians who fight the Syrian dictator and murderer Bashar al-Assad have agreed to not fight each other anymore so that they can fight together, actually both Assad, but separately, not together. But here's our plan for them. We're going to give the moderate ones training and weapons to fight the militant ones, to help us destroy the militant ISIS ones as they both fight Assad. The moderate ones will be on the ground, we'll be in the air, and together we'll fight ISIS on the ground with the help of the mostly disbanded Iraqi army over in Iraq. Is there any chance that that won't go well? Of course, General Dempsey said today, this plan may not work. He said if this doesn't work, they'll be going back to the drawing board, as he put it in testimony today. What's left on the drawing board? Well, U.S. troops, whom the military admitted today it may need to fight ISIS to destroy ISIS with the military. Troops as solution to destroy. So what about this, General Dempsey?
There is no, I mean, it may be a tough pill to swallow, but there is no military solution. It's got to be part of a broader whole of government regional campaign.
There is no military solution. Part of a broader whole of government regional campaign. The government of Syria, with its leader Bashar al-Assad, or the government of Iraq, the new government there, the government which has shown no signs of the kind of inclusiveness that our leaders insist is required to make all of this work. The problem with the old government, our leaders told us repeatedly, was primarily Nouri al-Maliki. He was the problem. He excluded these people, so now they fight with ISIS against his government. Nouri al-Maliki had to go. In the new Iraq government is Nouri al-Maliki, vice president. In the new war, our fighters are the moderate ones in Syria and the army that folded in Iraq, unless we need U.S. troops, which the military admits today it may. Recapping some recent history. In 2003, we went into Iraq to liberate. Our troops decimated its army in days. Now in Iraq, there is dysfunction, repression, and a society at war. We set out to destroy al-Qaeda. We killed Osama bin Laden. We left with the splinter group ISIS, which we now must destroy. Our plan to create its destruction is this: rely on Iraqi troops and Syrian moderates on the ground. None of our boots on the ground. But remember, according to the military, there is no military solution.